I want to respond to the young people, young and old, who are breaking out of the permanent war narrative, and they are joining with Americans and others who are increasingly dissatisfied with the two wars, the Mideast War and the Russia-Ukraine war. Most of the people who protest the war, I believe, will support peace. We have to have peace. And this is going to be a new idea. It's not simply a longer truce. So we're talking about something very new. Other Western countries, besides, the United States and wherever else you've had these street protests, have a general unrest against the permanent war and the policies that create these swarms of refugees, for example. I'll get back to that later. This, of course, is not a peace movement. Even people that are condemning the slaughter in Palestine do not constitute a peace movement. They're not actually calling for peace because we don't have an idea of it. We urgently need a peace movement, and we need it now, while this latest horrifying war is raging, now, before Christmas. We do not have a peace movement in recent memory. And really, it's because we have no real idea of peace, and we haven't had the power to do it. So I'm going to present here tonight an idea for a real peace based on American history. And I will end by discussing the new power that we have to achieve peace that has rather suddenly emerged in the recent past. First, let's ask, what is peace? What do you have when you have peace, and how do you get peace? It starts with security from attack and with the stability of daily life. Franklin Roosevelt called this freedom from fear. The second thing is that lasting peace starts with economic progress and economic security. This always requires investments in capital-intensive projects. To get that kind of economic progress is what Franklin Roosevelt called freedom from want. And then finally, this approach, security and economic progress, this double approach requires the consent of both sides. It has to benefit both sides, and ultimately both sides have to participate. This is sovereignty. This is self-government. And it obviously will not last if you don't have that. It means that the countries doing this are with their own consent, cooperating with the other side. Very unlikely to happen, obviously, in the Middle East without power being exerted from the outside. The two warring sides have to cooperate, and also the big East and West countries have to cooperate to guarantee the peace and to implement the investments. Now, before you think this all sounds like maybe it's a good idea, but it's impossible in the present world and so forth, and it's never been possible. It's not the nature of man. So I'm going to present a couple of examples, 3 examples from American history that show the traditional American policy. The first one is from the American Civil War. Lincoln had this idea. He died before it could be carried out. He died right at the end of the war. But after the war, his allies, who were nationalists, this is Thaddeus Stevens in Congress and Henry Carey, the great economist who was the advisor to Lincoln, they proposed that the South be fundamentally changed. You need 2 things in so-called reconstruction of the South. These are the radicals who wanted to protect Black rights, and that could never happen without fundamentally changing the South to eliminate the plantation economy. So first of all, you need security. You have to have troops in the South temporarily to guarantee the Black people from attack. But long term and immediately, you have to start economic transformation. You have to use industry there. You have to build industry on the basis of their own southern resources, iron, coal, other minerals, and there's a basis for that in the mountain regions. That was the policy of the most progressive Americans. And that was the way that wasn't done because it was shot down by the Anglo-Americans who opposed this policy that would have made America a superpower to begin with right there by changing the South. FDR had to deal with it later. The second proposal and policy was Franklin Roosevelt's policy at the end of another war, the World War II. He proposed that for security of the post-war world, the 4 great powers, what he called the 4 policemen, the United States, Britain, Russia, and China, would together block war. Any other proposal for security was wildly impractical. This is the only practical proposal. People like Churchill knew that. They didn't want that kind of security in the world. So FDR proposed security based on guaranteeing the peace by the force of those great countries working together. And then to reverse imperialism, get modern conditions in the former colonial countries in Africa and the Mideast and Asia. Build up modern conditions using the resources of those poor regions for their own development rather than plundering. And this was, in FDR's proposal, it was the first country that he proposed to do that with was Iran. Use the oil there instead of having it taken out by the British. That policy was betrayed by the same faction that did it in the Reconstruction after Civil War, the Anglo-American financier faction. And then John Kennedy revived Franklin Roosevelt. He, in the 1950s, before he was president, he became affiliated with Afro-Asian nationalism, the freedom movements in Africa and the Arab nationalists and Asia. And he was an anti-communist, and he said that we have to do better than the communists with these countries, and then reject working with imperialism. And then he proposed that we that the US and the USSR should cooperate for these objectives and set the tone for how this would be accomplished. He said that we need regional cooperation between the former enemies, like India and Pakistan, whose enmity was set up by the empire. And he was talking about very specific, what we would consider outrageous proposals for nuclear-powered desalination. That was a very big thing for him. He changed the International Atomic Energy Agency to try to bring that about. So this was Kennedy's peace policy, aside from simply calling for peace in the great speech in June '63. Now, if the present US policy is for war and insecurity, we need to have real power of a movement to change the policy, to overcome entrenched interests who promote the wars. That peace power is appearing now in the world. You have people in the streets against the war. They were really put in the streets by this Israel-Palestine war, but they were starting to be in the streets around Ukraine, and you have that in Europe. Now, also, that's the first part of this, what can become a peace movement. The second part of it is the people who are rejecting the establishment and what the establishment has done to cause chaos and destroy the security of the planet and the living standards. People, for example, reject the swarms of migrants coming into Europe or coming across the US border from the south. Do they have a proposal that would help the situation? No, they're not addressing the problem. But the policy for war is what's causing the refugees. It's the same policy in Latin America. It's really violence, and you have these cartels that are just as good as an enemy war, these drug cartels. So don't treat these people who have rejected the migrants as some sort of enemy fascist or something. They are rejecting the current policy. They don't have the idea of peace. That has to be provided. And then the third part of this clearly is the global South and the East, meaning the BRICS countries, and China is the leader of this together with Russia. And they are looking to have a peaceful policy and development. Again, with any of those, none of those countries is actually putting forward a peace program. They're critical of the wars, and they're looking for truces, which is good. That's good energy. And they have the idea of development, which is crucial. The idea of security. It's what we have now is in embryo a peace movement that doesn't know itself as a peace movement. Even the freaks, you have to look at the freaks like in Holland or Argentina. You have two leaders recently won elections. In Holland, a crazy guy attacking Islam, and in Argentina, a guy that wants to completely give up the country's sovereignty and submerge it in debt. Nevertheless, look at these as clinical problems. The voters are fed up with the chaos, and the chaos comes from a policy to promote war and chaos. So I am proposing that we urge that we come to an idea of a peace policy, a peace movement. It's already appeared, and I would say that by Christmas, we need this idea to surge, to go viral. Again, the people in the streets, the people anguished by the present situation, by the slaughter, I believe will heartily back this. And I think that millions of people in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Canada, the European countries, whatever, however bad their policies are, the people are easily split on this. You have to deliberately widen that split. And I'm not talking about split between the parties. I'm talking about between war and peace. Those are the two parties in the world, really. Those are the real parties. If you take sides in a conflict, and that's what you're doing, you haven't proposed a peace policy. Obviously, we look at, you know, guilt and so forth. It's a trap. It's a trap. So this we have to have a peace movement right now. So that's my proposal, and I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion.
I have, I guess, a little question, Anton.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
A lot of people yearn for the outcome and the pathway that you put forth, but their lack of knowledge over the historical battles or the precedents that have made this work in the past is small, too small to properly problem solve what we're currently going through. So I was just wondering, in your research on history, are there any examples you would go to within the American experience that would illustrate how this is very possible and doable and lawful? This taking enemies who have been multi-generational hostilities and found a way to bring harmony slowly to that process.
Well, first of all, if you go back to the Civil War, we didn't have the power after Lincoln's murder to get a real policy to redeem the South in the right way. It was all undermined by the power of these new royalists, economic royalists. When Franklin Roosevelt proposed a post-war peace policy, this was accepted with a thrill by the underdeveloped countries. He had been working on this throughout his presidency. It started when he did the Atlantic Charter, 1940, where he said that what this conflict is about is to end the power of one country over another. And people said, well, are you talking about just Hitler? No, he's talking about the empire also. And so that set off a chain reaction in Africa and elsewhere, North Africa, South Africa, and elsewhere. And people like the leader of South Africa, what's his name? Shoot. What's his?
Smuts. Jan Christian Smuts.
No, not him.
Back then.
The black leader who was the first.
Mandela.
Nelson Mandela.
Mandela, yeah, he responded to this, and other people did in the same way. People in North Africa as well, Arabs. And this became the American policy to redeem civilization. This brought people back to the idea of America that they had from over the course of generations. America was the country that brought electricity to the world, things like that. So this FDR was wildly popular throughout the world. Brazil changed their constitution to go with his TVA policy. Mexico confiscated the foreign oil companies in cooperation with FDR's New Deal, and their whole Mexico's New Deal was based on that. So this was a worldwide policy in applause for America's program to never have another Holocaust. This is how you stop having Holocausts in the future. You have to guarantee security and to spread civilization. So we already had a peace movement at that time. And that what happened after that was the whole thing was hijacked in the Cold War. This is a very deep subject to get into, but you have to look how deeply the world accepted and needed what Winston Churchill rejected for the post-war world. Again, John Kennedy had the same thing. When Kennedy was president, especially as he went further into his presidency, we were getting a peace movement together. We were getting a movement that would be this more, in my mind, is more than anything else, is the reason he was assassinated. And that is that he had the makings of a very, very solid and enduring majority support for a national policy of peace and development. First of all, in 1963, the civil rights movement came together with him, which it had not been before. This was something that was developing, so they became allies. He was the one who proposed the civil rights bill that Johnson later carried through. Then you had the auto workers and other union workers. And again, this is something that developed. He was not a liberal in that sense to begin with. He also had, and they were supporting him. He also had business very largely on his side. Who was not on his side? The big Wall Street banks and the international financial clique from London to New York and other places. Later was the offshore people. These were bitter enemies. There were factions in the intelligence and so forth. But the popular conception of him in our country and then in Africa and the Middle East was amazing. When he was a senator, Kennedy, before president, he was giving speeches against imperialism and saying we have to back Algerian independence, the Arabs, and African independence generally. And we reject, he did this ever since 51. So these guys from Africa and Asia would come to his senatorial office from all over the world because he was their champion. This is, again, putting people together in other countries with the United States of America. That's a peace movement. And that's what we could do now, because you have people in the United States, all they have to do is look at these other countries, the South, the needs of the South, the needs of the Middle East, the needs of the countries that are beset by these wars and by poverty. And if you look at them, instead of just, keeping your face buried in partisan politics in America, then you will see the needs that require this peace policy. People are not going to just change by themselves. That you have to have the idea of it put forward in a peace movement. And I'm telling you that get the idea first. Get the idea out. It's security and it's development. Those two things have to go together. If you understand that, you can promote it. If you don't understand it, don't don't say it's not possible because you don't know what you're talking about. If you follow what I'm saying now, this is new. This is not something that you can look up. We had these things in our history. We don't have them now. But all the people in the Chinese, the Russians, all those countries that are joining the BRICS countries will definitely go for this combination, this idea of peace. It's very simple in a certain way, but they're not putting it forward as the basis for peace. So that's my answer to it. There isn't any real exact analogy in American history for the movement that we need now. We've had 50 years or more of growing insanity by the Anglo-Americans, and now we have a chance to really force a change. We have compelling forces within our country and other countries that can split the whole body politic and just surge with a new idea.
Thank you, Tony. Peter has a question. Peter, you want me to read it, or you want to say it yourself? You're muted.
I'm going to read it myself. Okay. This was an historic question for you, Anton. Has the U.S. ever proposed the New Deal program for the Near East, West Asia? The U.S. secured the alliance with the House of Saud on FDR's voyage to Yalta. Was there more than a commitment to the House of Saud in that trip?
Well, when was the trip? Which trip?
This
That's the Yalta trip. Okay, I'm sorry. You said Yalta.
The Yalta trip.
Okay. Yeah, that's in the very last one before he died. Well, we had this policy. This kind of an idea was actually revived by Lyndon LaRouche, and in the I guess that would be in the 70s and going into the 80s, and his wife Helga was very active with the Chinese and introduced this with some reference back to the Americans who had this idea in the 19th century. Henry Carey, who had the entire land bridge policy, the entire policy that the Chinese have adopted. But this was then pressed, and there were many people in Europe that were involved in this idea, and in Latin America. This has been actually going on, this double-sided policy for security and development. Security is the new name for peace, this kind of thing. This is many people at the UN have had this put forward and have put it forward themselves. But China, you have to ask yourself the question: if you are a human being, if you are a civilized person, and you actually look at Africa, let's say, or some of the worst situations in like the Palestinians in the Middle East, and if the Chinese are committed to building infrastructure in these countries, what's your counter proposal? If you're hostile to China, if you're hostile to what China is doing in that regard, there isn't any counter proposal. There's only the proposal for war inside Africa, chaos in Africa, chaos and war between Israel and Palestine. There's really not two sides to this story. There's either war or peace, and peace requires the development of those countries. So China is doing this now. If you don't like the Chinese government, then I would suggest that you have the United States government at its best become a partner and exert a good influence with our Constitution. We have elections. We have, freedom of speech, or we used to. Let's show the world what they could do with a free country. But we're not part of that now. We're saying to the world, we don't need development, we don't need peace, we need war, and we need chaos, which comes from war. So that's really where it is right now. If you ask who's done this in the past, that's who's done it. And now it is definitely being put forward by China and Russia. Russia's involved in Africa with nuclear power development and other projects. They're also in favor of sovereignty. And they're being very careful about the Mideast war. They're not trying to spread a communist revolution anywhere that people were worried about with the Soviets. So this is a different situation, and the United States has to be changed, and the peace movement can do that, but it has to be a global thing, and it has to involve splitting the war versus peace in the United States. And I think an overwhelming majority will support peace in our country if they understand it, if they get the idea.
Tony, I have a question.
Okay.
What specific development projects would you propose for the Middle East?
The first thing that's required there is that you have the guarantee of security. And this is not, obviously, it's not an easy thing, because right now, neither side, the Israelis or the Palestinians, is favorable to the continued existence of the other side. I don't want to get into a discussion about Zionism or the history of that whole phenomenon. The fact is that you need to have a guarantee of security for both sides. Neither side is in favor of that. They would feel that they're being blocked from taking care of their enemies in the right way. So the first step, that is a tough one, is for the other countries to get the gumption to say the obvious, that this kind of security, which is in the interest of those people, has to be imposed from the outside. And we're not talking about setting up regimes, not regime change, not going into Palestine like the Israelis are saying and displacing Hamas that was elected. We're not talking about people from the outside claiming that Netanyahu is crazy and you have to replace him. Well, in my view, a very large number of people in Israel are crazy at the present time. So you're not dealing with that just by talking about a regime change. So the first step for peace in the Middle East is the idea and the proposal from some force of countries, or even if you start with one country, that the present situation is of maximum danger to humanity. The danger of spreading the war, the danger of the example of so outrageous a situation that people give up hope and civilization goes down. So that has to stop, and it has to be imposed from outside. It's unacceptable. At this point, it's gone to the limit. That's the first step, is that you have to get the East and West major countries, US, the Five Eyes countries, the Europeans, Japan, Korea, and on the East, it's the China and Russia and the BRICS countries, and whoever else is for that. And there has to be a multilateral force that goes into that region with overwhelming force. You can't do this with some peacekeepers that are going to get shot at. You have to be able to demonstrate that the world is imposing a peace there. There's going to be a lot of people that have to say that what we've done in the last 30, 40 years was led to this tragedy. All right, that's the first step. At the same time, many people will claim that the development, like you raised the question, what's the specific projects? People can't really claim that they don't know what these projects are. This has been going on for decades. Israel has been there for how long? Since 1948. Since I was 5 years old. I'm 80 now. 75 years. War all the time, and many, many proposals for solving this with development. The Oasis Plan, the various plans for desalination, the various plans for using Israel's technology, just like we should have used South Africa's technology to develop a multiracial state. Various plans for the intelligent people of the region. Some of the people there are really the geniuses of the planet. Lebanon used to be the really smartest people in the world. There's smart people all over there. Let these human resources be used. Let the oil resources be used. Let them get rich from these resources. And you have to be willing to not begrudge Israel their share in this, even if it is poison in your mouth. This is part of the problem, and the same thing. Many parts of this are going to be hard, but some of it is quite easy if you're willing to at least discuss it. You can't do it with windmills and solar power. Sorry. Now what? There's not a whole lot of water power for dams. Maybe there is, but not on the Jordan River, and so forth. So there's a certain corridor and a channel of ideas that are relevant. A lot of it goes with the resources of the Arabs and the other people like Iran, and with the intelligence and savvy of the Israelis and Saudis and other people. You have the resources there. I'm not going to prescribe a whole development plan. That's, in a sense, it's missing the point. You have to have it. But you first have to have the idea of looking at people who are so desperately poor and so desperately unsettled and without a chance for any future at all. Start with, you need to have this reviewed. This is not somebody just come up with an idea. This is a problem for the whole world. You have social problems, you have cultural problems. You have to involve the people there in coming up with this kind of thing. As I said, it has to be cooperation between these people in the region, and part of the security that's imposed from the outside is imposing the entrance to this cooperation of all the parties, like Iran and like Israel. They don't have to like each other, but they both have to be admitted to the council table by the outside. They're not going to go voluntarily themselves. Who cares? That's not the point. This is tough. The security part of this is tougher than the other thing. The rest of it, you have to discuss it. If you change the environment from hell, which is what it is now, not just in Palestine, but hell in many ways. It's hell in Israel in many ways. It's hell in many other places, Yemen and so forth. If you change the environment in a positive direction, then people can have hope that you can tackle these other problems, like the terrible cultural problems there. So I don't want to say any more, but you get the idea, right? These are long-standing proposals already, and it's not my place to say what needs to be adopted.
Thanks, Tony. Peter, I was wondering if your question about nuclear disarmament, was that meant for Tony? Peter, are you there? You're on mute.
Yeah.
He wrote, so the nations of the world imposed nuclear disarmament on South Africa. I see the need to disarm Israel as it currently exists, or to change control over nuclear weapons there. Have you a comment on that?
Yeah, I see that as, I mean, unless they're, right on the verge of sending missiles with nuclear weapons, otherwise I would say that's not the first thing. I think the first thing, we have that same kind of an idea with Iran. The U.S. has been pounding at that, and it's missing the point. Why do people want to have nuclear weapons? Aside from Harry Truman, why do normal people want to have nuclear weapons? Because they want to protect themselves. I think it's as simple as that. So what you need to do is you have to have an environment where war is rapidly becoming blocked. You actually have to block a war. That the proposal from Roosevelt for blocking war with these the four great powers involved general disarmament. Now, if that sounds idealistic or like against the nature of man or God knows what, you have to look at it the other way around. The general idea of imperialism has been sending weapons as furiously and as fast as you can to start wars. Arm almost everybody. Arm your enemies. Arm everybody. Arm enemies of each other. And then convince the other guy that he doesn't have as many as he does. And then you control the chaos and you make profit on the weapons while you do it. That's what he was counteracting when FDR proposed a policy of disarming. In other words, to first block the war, and then block the policy that generates war as an idea, as a purposeful thing. People say that sometimes you need to go to war. Like, didn't we need to fight Hitler? They raise that, as opposed to some of the things that I'm saying now. And I could say, well, there are circumstances where you're forced to make war in order to, save civilization. But if that isn't just an emergency thing, but it's going on all the time, then you have to change the policy. The policy is causing those circumstances. My father was a leader of the boycott against Hitler in 1933 and 34, and he was trying to stop and sued Wall Street firms working with Hitler at that time. Don't say we had to fight Hitler with a war. How about not promoting Hitler in the first place? That would be a good idea. Wouldn't you all agree with that? So that this is the argument against this kind of a disarmament policy, this kind of a peace policy, is futile, really, in my view. To me, you don't start with disarmament. I don't like the weapons. I think the weapons are dangerous, and therefore I call upon people to disarm. So what? They're not going to listen to you on that basis, and it won't happen that way. You have to have a policy that guarantees security first for people generally. That's my view, anyway.
Thanks, Tony. Glenn Isherwood has 2 questions.
Yeah.
Glenn?
Yeah, Anton, thank you. I was struck by what you're saying about the new concept of security being tied to peace. This week, I listened to a radio interview with Chaz Freeman, the former ambassador.
Yep.
And he was saying that with the US support for Israel in this war, this new front, he said that the US is on the verge of some form of psychological breakdown. But what struck me about what he said is that Chaz Freeman was saying that the things that made the US, an authority in the world, a reference point for Western civilization were due process, rule of law, and individual freedom. And there's been a breakdown of those standards to a concept of might makes right. And he said that you can't defend Western values in dealing with China, Russia, and other nations if you don't live by those rules yourself. So anyway, I'd welcome comment on, if you've got a chance to listen to that. But I think he is looking at this as a statesman would, about getting across a different concept of what the United States needs to be. What do you think about in terms of, you talk about security, this is the question. When words like security get raised in an American context, people straight away think military industrial complex. We need security. We need Army, Navy, Air Force. And it strikes me the US in the period since World War II, there hasn't been a drop in military budgets, except when the wall came down, the end of the Soviet Union. There was a couple of years there where the military budgets fell, but every single year, this military security budget has grown. How would you go about, combating that misunderstanding of security if that exists in the American mindset, that this is a feeding of the very military industrial complex?
Well, I think that the countries of the East and the South have a big responsibility to be honest about the situation. It should be clear to a person, and it is clear to people like Putin, really, and to Xi Jinping and so forth, that what the United States is doing with their policy and with the military policy and the intelligence policy and so forth is not in American interests. This sounds like it's a contradictory, but that's not the way they talk about it. They talk about America always wants to serve its own interests at other people's expense. In what way are these wars in America's interest? Nobody ever speaks to that, really. They talk about, like you said, security. But what is the actual interest of the United States? This requires people to honestly and seriously, people, if they don't understand history, research it, research American history, but to look into what are the accomplishments and the values of the United States. The values of our country didn't start with our country. All of the best leaders in the United States were students of history, of world history. You know, the founders in the colonial days were, you know, Cotton Mather. The leaders of the revolution were all students of world history, and that's true into the 20th century. People that got us out of the mess of the early 20th century, they were profound students. Probably FDR was the greatest student at that time of history. And so when they made proposals, they're basing those on certain kinds of assumptions, which are Western values, the West of the Renaissance, the West of the idea, in their view, usually the Christian idea. And this is the Christian idea as the best. I use the word evangelical, not in the sense that you might see it in some silly church in Texas, but the original evangelical idea is based on surprise. It's based on surprising people the same way that the ancient Greeks did when they said that your whole way of looking at something is not is counter to your own interests and your own happiness. You know, here's a surprise that you can have a relationship to success and to your own interests on a completely different basis. It really is what we would hope for from from this holiday season. We could get you have this in our Western religious tradition at its best. That's Western values. This idea that man is higher, and that really underlies. If that sounds like it's sentimental, then look deeply at the biographies of the best American leaders. They had this higher conception of man, and it is what energized them and informed their strategic policy. I believe the Chinese, at their best, have the same concept right now. So the Western values are being emulated by the Chinese. Part of the contribution of America, one of the greatest contributions, is the idea of national sovereignty. That's economic nationalism. That's not free trade. That's the idea that you have the duty to protect your own people's interests. And so we gave that idea to the world. America was the first powerful anti-imperialist country in the world. Not just from the revolution, breaking with the British Empire, but afterwards developed our country on the basis of defying the imperial power and the imperial dogmas about the world. So we gave that idea to the world. That's Western values. That's America's values. What we used to think of as the West versus the East was the Eastern idea, in contrast, was despotism, like in the empires of the ancient Middle East, who had these harsh and cruel gods. Western idea is, like you said, the individual sovereign personality, and the diversity of occupations, the diversity of personalities that we need for a stronger civilization and for a better division of labor. These are all Western contributions to the world. The East has many, many contributions. The South has many contributions, but this is definitely Western values. And all it takes really is courage for people in the East or in the South to say to the Americans, we respect your pride in your country. Here's what it is about. You just don't remember. You're just being foolish now. And Americans would respond to that. They don't want to be monsters. Right now, they're monsters. America's acting the part of a monster in the world, I have to say. That's not our heritage.
Thank you, Tony. I have Andrew Fox as a question.
Andrew. You're muted, Andrew.
You're mute, yes.
Do you see how to unmute? Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So I put my message up in the message box and I'll just read it back to you because I guess, you know, like Glenn, we're sitting on the outside. And
Andrew, it's
can you
very
hear me
hard.
okay?
Andrew, it's very hard to hear you. There's a kind of an echo going on there. Do you want me to read the question that you put in the box?
Yes, do that, please.
Okay. So Andrew says, I have a question. We have two potential leaders that seem to have the more interests of the USA, of people at heart than most others, Trump and RFK Jr. Trump has been the president of the USA, working towards re-election, and RFK Jr. working towards election of president as well. What do you think is the best chance of either, or who should be encouraged? Both. That's
maybe.
your opinion.
Well, I think that when Trump, and I wrote this recently in the article that many of you probably saw, that when Trump first ran for president in 2016, he was proposing to shift the U.S. policy away from insanity, away from the wars, towards cooperation with Russia, and away from the economic insanity of globalism. How well did he fulfill that? Well, first of all, he did not propose a general change in American policy as something where he's teaching the people, but as a leader, what should be done and what was wrong. Where do we go wrong as a nation? He never did that. And so he could have undercut this savage freak out against him by the liberal establishment, where they were going to give him the JFK treatment, including assassination. He never undercut it in the right way because he did not play the role that an American president ought to play. And that is to say to the people, we as a nation went wrong. We as a nation have a better heritage. We have people in other countries that want us to be that better country that we were. These are my proposals. I want to have a dialogue with the American people to come to the right kind of change, and I'm willing to put my life on the line, and I believe that you should too, to make that change in our economy and in our foreign policy. If he had done that, then you would have had an immediate political crisis in the Democratic Party and otherwise. He didn't do it. You have, and of course, you've had this sickness of people who care nothing about anything except hating Donald Trump or hating the liberals who attack him. But I would say that recognizing how he started off and his general approach. You have to recognize that, I believe. But then if you take Robert F. Kennedy Jr., obviously recently he made his response known to this war between Israel and Palestine, and it was shockingly bad. He didn't put forward even a proposal to stop this war. He said we have to back Israel. So if he were to start with some kind of candid, he has to be really candid to say what I said has proven to be insufficient. We have to have a different policy. Our country has the wrong policy. And so we're going to need to shut this war down, and we're going to need a different policy from the United States for peace. The U.S. should be part of the peace process in the world, and I want to initiate that with my presidential campaign. He could do that, and there are people inside his campaign that are urging him to do so. That's what I can tell you. You could have some surprises from there.
Thanks, Tony. Ginger has a question about
Great.
education of our youth.
Yes.
Ginger, you there?
You have to unmute, Ginger. We can't hear you, Ginger, because you didn't unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, I'm here, but I'm grabbing. I just got a low battery notification. So it just plugged into the wall. Hey, Anton. So my question was about educating kids. Actually, we've been struggling for a good history curriculum for kids. And of course, we've got Who We Are. So we've been working on that one, but I'm really interested to find out the history, the literature, the reading that you would recommend for high school level kids, since probably educating our youth is a big key to the solution as well. Thank you.
Well, I've got a few things to say about that. First of all, no child is really too young to be involved in a peace movement. And so you don't want to fill their minds with horrors about atrocities and the terrible things that are very scary about the world, but they ought to know about what people who want to change the world for the better are doing, and sacrifices they're making and so forth. So I think that has a wonderful effect on children. The idea of justice being connected with doing good, not just revenge, these kind of things. When I was studying American history for the first time seriously, which means I was out of school, I found that first of all, that biographies of the very, very best people are a crucial way to get some valid ideas of what's good about humanity and what we ought to do. So I as opposed to history textbooks, I don't have anything to recommend in general, because that's why I'm writing what I'm doing, and I hope that people will spread support for I have limited resources to carry on doing this writing. I think early next year I'm going to finish the second volume. I'm about 80% done, and I'm going to be getting it out. So I'd like people to, read that stuff. I think it's state of the art. In other words, it's not just my own work. I've collaborated with many people over 50 years of work on this. But I think this is state of the art. So that's another statement. Otherwise, I would say that if you look at these places like Israel and Palestine, like Russia, like China, like South America and Central America, these are places that have had ancient, great civilizations, and they are in many ways, that's the heritage. To get to know some of these places, a child should know about the world. Another part of the education that I found lacking in the United States children, when I was working as a tutor, is that they don't have any idea today about how the physical, man's physical environment, the cities or, your house or anything really works. Water comes from your faucet, or otherwise it comes from a river and then it's in your faucet. Well, no, it's not that simple. How do things actually work? They have no idea. They don't know where they are. They think that if you ask them how far is it across the country? How far is it from here to Israel, to Palestine? How far is it? You can put this together with ideas about astronomy and some other sciences, but the literacy in that respect about the world that man has created, and the world and who man is, especially in some of these areas where, like the sacred Jerusalem, sacred to three faiths, you don't have to believe one of them. It's a beautiful thing to do. So I was in Jerusalem and I was pretty inspired, but they should know these things. They should know who man is, and they also should know how man lives. Really, that's a really important thing, is that the physical economy, for especially for Americans of this generation, whether they live in a middle class, upper middle class big house, or they've got some terrible job, in a hamburger joint or whatever it is, or nothing, no job, or if they're homeless, they all the same, they don't know squat about how things really work, unless they were a skilled person. They're down on their luck, which is a lot of people. But this is, rather than a curriculum, this is what I would say, except for what I write. Everybody should read what I write.
Also, Peter agrees with you. He had a little list here. He said who we are definitely needs to be on the list, and Matthew Ehret's 4-part series. Then Andrew Fox says, I recommend Alexander Hamilton's report on manufacturers. And again, Who We Are by Anton Chaitkin. Okay. And then Matt says Graham Lowry's How the Nation Was Won, plus all the reference within it.
And when Matt Ehret's work,
yes,
is unprecedented for what he's hitting at and striking in on a, I don't see how he does it, on a daily basis. So you can subscribe to Matt.
Yeah, and Treason in America, he also listed.
What's that?
Treason in America, the 1984 edition.
Yeah, with some caveats.
Schiller's 30-Year Wars, Revolt of the Netherlands, and his Universal History lectures of Schiller. They're all listed in the chat section. I hope you can see it.
Thanks so much, everyone. Yes, we have we have Alexander Hamilton's report on the subject of manufacturers. We've got LaRouche. So you wish to learn all about economics, and also Nancy Braden Spanos. I don't know how to say, but she did a Hamilton versus Wall Street. She's got a really good book on that, but I really appreciate all and we love Frederick Douglass, because Cynthia Chung put us up to this. That was amazing. So we started there, is probably learning the mind of the slave owner, and but mostly the inherent power of the human spirit. I think through this time can give everybody hope. So thank you very much, Anton, and everyone for the.
Well, and if there's not more, I don't know if
There's no
anybody else?
more questions, Tony, so far.
All right. Well, we could call it a night then. So do me a favor, everybody, and run this over in your minds about this idea, and see if you can't try to make this go viral. I'm going to put this this session, it's being recorded. I'm going to put it on, for everybody who's a subscriber. It's about 550 people, and I hope that people will spread this. We need a peace movement, and we need the idea of peace now. So that's new. It's a new idea, really, in the world, if we could get this going on the basis of the new forces in action. So thank you very much, everybody. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you,
Okay.
Anton.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Magdalena.
Anton. Good
Tony.
Shabbos.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you all. Good to chat.
Bye.